Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is campaigning in Michigan today ahead of tomorrow's Republican primary there. She's resisting calls to drop out of the race after losing to former President Trump in the South Carolina primary on Saturday. Instead, Haley is now on a 10-day nationwide swing in the lead up to Super Tuesday, when more than a third of all GOP delegates will be up for grabs. The Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump, beat the former South Carolina governor by just over 20 points in her home state on Saturday. Robert Costa and Ed O'Keefe join us now to discuss. Robert is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent, and he is in the great state of Michigan. But, Bob, I'm going to start with you because you're right here. Haley got 40% to Trump's roughly 60%. A big gap, but not quite as big as some were expecting.
It's indicative of a division inside the Republican Party among traditional Republicans who are wary of Trump. They're going with Haley, not by a significant margin, but it's at least 30 to 40, maybe even 40 plus in some of these states. And that's why she's staying in the race. She believes there is a coalition out there for her to at least stay in through Super Tuesday.
Right. And she's making no bones about the fact that she's staying in at least until then. Ed, you actually spoke with Nikki Haley earlier today. What is she saying about the future of the Republican Party and the RNC?
Well, she's seizing on the reports today, Nancy, that the chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, is on her way out to be replaced by the former president's daughter-in-law, one of his senior campaign advisors, Chris LaCivita. Her argument being that they shouldn't be changing leadership at the Republican National Committee during a primary, perhaps after a primary. We talked to her about that and concerns that some have that the former president will use the RNC as a legal defense fund. Take a listen. Should someone like you have a say in who the RNC picks as its new chairperson?
Well, absolutely. We should be able to.
Sounds like that you're not going to have the option, though.
We should be able to go and make sure they are non-biased as long as there is a primary. But think about it. There are resolutions now, one saying that you can't have any bias as long as there's a primary going into something like this. The other saying the RNC shouldn't be used to pay Donald Trump's legal fees.
And you support that?
It absolutely shouldn't be used. I mean, what they've said is his daughter-in-law and his campaign manager, who will now be running the RNC if Donald Trump gets his way, have said that the RNC will now be completely about Donald Trump. Forget up and down the ticket. Forget Republican Party issues. This is now a legal slush fund. He's spent over $60 million of campaign contributions on his personal court cases. At this rate, there's going to be another $100 million that he will spend. How do you defeat a Democrat, who I don't think is going to be Joe Biden? It will be someone younger. How do you defeat a Democrat when you have no money? That's the problem.
So, Nancy, that's part of the argument she's making, a little more specific and in response to some movement just in the last few days regarding a leadership change there for the Republican Party. But as Bob said earlier, 30 to 40% of the party is siding with her or against the former president. And her argument now is he's going to need that 40% to win a general election. We shouldn't have to bend to his will. He should come around to try to woo us, or Republicans should be voting for her instead.
That's a great point. And yet, Bob, you never know what percentage of people who support an opponent in a primary aren't just going to come back and support the eventual nominee when we get to November. So how worried is the Trump team really that all of these Haley voters that are taking a stand against him now won't return to the fold in the fall?
They're not that concerned. They believe that ultimately most Republican voters, even if they don't like former President Trump's conduct or his rhetoric on issues like race, that they're ultimately going to rally around him come the fall, should he be the nominee, because they don't like President Biden. The challenge for Trump is Haley and her coalition isn't the only threat to his own. He could be a felon by the time the election comes around. He's facing a criminal hush money trial in New York. It starts later in March. And if he's convicted there, maybe also faces a trial on January 6th or classified records, he'll have a lot of legal problems sitting on his shoulders politically. And that may not drive voters to Biden, but it could make them stay home. It's going to be really interesting to watch. Can Trump not only move back to the center politically in some ways, can he win over those traditional Republicans and reassure them if Haley's not the nominee, as it looks like right now?
Those legal troubles, one of the reasons that Nikki Haley is staying in the race, sort of as an insurance card. Ed, you actually spoke with Haley about why she thinks that President Biden won't be the Democratic nominee. What did she say about this?
This is something she brings up often, Nancy, so we tried to poke at this argument a little bit. Take a look. You keep making the point, too, that the president won't be the Democratic nominee. It'll be someone younger. What makes you think that?
You can look at Joe Biden now. The Democrat Party is already scrambling to figure out who's going to be the person. It is not going to be Joe Biden. And Republicans need to wake up and know you're going to be running against a younger candidate. Guaranteed, mark my words, it is not going to be Joe Biden. They are working on that now. They're trying to find out who that option is going to be.
They're working on that now?
I mean, who tells you that they're not?
Well, I mean, I cover the White House and the Democratic Party, and I have seen no evidence that they're doing that other than showing up for events, interviews, running ads about abortion rights, as Gavin Newsom is doing. But it doesn't mean he's necessarily actively preparing to be the nominee.
You don't think any of the Democrat leaders are talking about the state of Joe Biden right now?
Oh, sure, they do that.
That's my point.
So your thinking is that they'll just continue plotting ahead to get rid of him?
I mean, I think they are trying to look at what's ahead. And I think they know what's ahead is not Joe Biden for a second term. They've got to figure out what's next. Who's next?
Interesting argument, and she has a point, Nancy, about how Democrats are, getting their names out there, if only at least officially, publicly on the president's behalf right now, laying the groundwork perhaps for their own futures come 2028 or maybe sooner. Who knows?
Sure. Although, as you say, no evidence over at the White House that the current president is thinking of withdrawing his name from contention. Bob, I want to ask you about some comments that the former president made over the weekend that got a lot of negative attention, talking about his appeal to black voters. Let's take a listen to those and then talk on the other side.
The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population. It's incredible. You see black people walking around with my mugshot. You know, they do shirts and they sell them for $19 a piece. It's pretty amazing.
You've been out on the campaign trail quite a bit. Do you see a lot of black voters wearing T-shirts with his mugshot on them?
I have not. Former President Trump's comments were called disgusting by Nikki Haley when I was following her around and speaking to her in South Carolina. And she has been highly critical of his comments. But you haven't seen Haley's refrain echoed by many congressional Republicans or Republican governors. There's not an outcry.
Why is that?
Because the Republican Party has become Trump's party in many respects. And he is the leader, even if he's not yet officially the nominee. And people are not necessarily fearful of him. They're fearful of alienating his core supporters in their respective states, who, if they take a position on him that's very tough about his racially charged rhetoric, words about black Americans that many black Americans and other Americans find offensive, that they're somehow getting out of line with the Republican position on Trump. And they believe he actually can make inroads with voters of color this year on issues like the economy and echoing his grievances. Yeah. This is what Trump is saying, is that whether it's Americans who are black or Americans of other races, that because of his legal challenges, he can somehow cast himself as an outsider to the political establishment and legal establishment. This is exactly what he did in 2016. He did it again even when he was the incumbent in 2020. So this approach, this language by Trump is so unsurprising to most Republicans. Haley's outraged by it, but others are not. And that's just typical of what the GOP is today with Trump at the lead. Yeah, I mean, you think about 10 years ago, if a Republican candidate had said, the lights are so bright, I can only see the black voters in the room, how the party would have responded. The norms have been shattered so much. The norms being shattered on the floor is now the norm. Yeah, no kidding. Bob Costa, thank you so much. Ed O'Keefe in Michigan, thanks to you as well.